Up next, a little bit of her story as we visit the home of a great American woman. Stay with us. Hi, I'm Gail Street, host of Paths to the Present. We've got a great show for you today. Our feature is the Glen Echo home of Clara Barton, which operated for a time as the headquarters of the American Red Cross. We also inaugurate a new mini-series revealing Montgomery County locations found in feature films. Today's movie, the 1988 film Chances Are. But first, let's test your knowledge of the past with our history quiz. Today's quiz asks, what is this? With an elongated shape, this iron object dates to the mid-1900s. There are points protruding from either side and a hole at one of the tips. It even comes apart. Think you know what it is? Stay tuned. I'll give you the answer at the end of the show. When watching a major motion picture, rarely are we there because of the sights found in the background. Most of the time, we focus on the stars and the storyline and perhaps the special effects. But movies have to be shot somewhere, and a few found their way to Montgomery County. That's why we're initiating a new occasional series we're calling Real Stories. So get your popcorn, sit back, and pay attention. Viewing the Hollywood film Chances Are is like taking a tour of Washington, D.C. Much of it is set in very familiar locations that we recognize and perhaps have visited. Robert Downey Jr. and Sybil Shepherd play Alex and Corinne in a story about reincarnation and love. What looks like a May-December romance is really the reunion of two lovers separated long ago by an untimely death. Alex embodies Louis, Corinne's first and only love, who has returned to Earth to expose a crooked judge. Their story is set in the District of Columbia and uses locations in and around the city. But two locations are really here in Montgomery County.
I want to have at least 2 more.
Babies?
It's not too late, is it?
No.
Does this ride look familiar? It's Montgomery County's very own Denzel Carousel at Glen Echo Park. Today, the carousel sparkles after a major renovation in the early 90s. It was first installed at Glen Echo in 1921. The park had already been open for 15 years. Then it was a destination point at the end of the trolley line. Glen Echo drew people from far and wide until 1968 when it closed. Today, it's been restored and serves as a cultural center with programs in the arts and humanities. At the centerpiece is the carousel, with its hand-carved animals and lilting organ music. It still delights young and old. Do you recognize this setting? It's probably a bit more elusive. Fewer people have seen this interior. However, if you paid a traffic ticket, you've been in this building. This location appears twice. Initially, it's the 1960s courtroom where Louis first witnessed the corrupt judge.
Permission to approach the bench, Judge Fenwick.
Then it hosts the climatic scene in which Alex, as Louis, reveals all.
Clerk will call the case.
Your Honor, the case of the United States versus Lawrence Garber.
Without that evidence, the counts against Tony Bonino are out the window. Bonino was one of the most cunning and powerful individuals in organized crime.
Request permission to approach the bench, Your Honor.
Alex.
I know about you and Anthony Bonino.
Both scenes were filmed in Courtroom 20 of the District Court of Rockville. The Gray Courthouse, as it's often called, was built in 1931. The county had outgrown the smaller red brick courthouse next door. For 50 years, it housed both the district and the circuit courts. Today, the room's been renovated, but it looked like this when the movie company used it for the set. For 3 days in June, Rockville was abuzz while filming went on. This Gazette article shows the lighting equipment that was mounted outside the windows. It also reports that many locals were hired to be extras for the scenes, and that scores waited outside to get a glimpse of the stars. While some big-name stars are featured in Chances Are, some local Montgomery County sites also had prominent roles. So next time you're watching a movie, look a little closer. You just might see your own backyard. Clara Barton's home in Glen Echo offers a glimpse into the life of this famous American woman. It was a life of service dedicated to helping others. Today, this National Historic Site consists of the house and the grounds owned by Clara Barton during the last 15 years of her life. Guided tours offer visitors a chance to walk in the footsteps of this remarkable American. Clara Barton was 75 when she moved to her home in Glen Echo. She was 59 when she was chosen to be the first president of the newly formed American Association of the Red Cross. Her desire to help started early on. Ranger Susan, who leads the tours for the National Park Service, explains.
Clara Barton is most famous for her work in the American Civil War, and she had earned her nickname Angel of the Battlefield while working in Maryland after the Battle of Antietam. Many history books will call her a Civil War nurse, but she was never a true nurse. She was never trained as a nurse, and that was not an option available to women during her childhood.
Born in 1821 to Stephen and Sarah Barton, Clara Barton grew up in this home in North Oxford, Massachusetts. At age 17, she began her first job as a school teacher. In 1855, she moved to Washington, D.C. and worked in the U.S. Patent Office. When the Civil War broke out, Clara Barton was drawn to help. She worked tirelessly throughout the war to bring medical care to injured soldiers. When the war ended, her work wasn't done. She saw another need and sought to fill it.
The United States Army did not have a program to notify families of men who had passed on in prison camps, and Clara Barton asked permission to work with them. She traveled to Annapolis and interviewed former prisoners and started to write letters back to families. She established an office of correspondence with the Friends of the Missing Men of the United States Army, and in 4 years of running this program had answered over 63,000 letters and had identified information for over 22,000 missing men.
In 1869, Clara Barton traveled to Europe for a well-deserved vacation. While there, the Franco-Prussian War broke out. Unable to turn her back on people in need, Miss Barton offered to help with the war relief. She worked with the German Red Cross, part of the International Red Cross, an organization that was new to her.
And she saw a real difference in what could be accomplished with an organization. People who were trained, people who already knew their jobs, supplies that were coming in. It was much more efficient than what she had tried to manage on her own during the American Civil War. One person trying to make a difference versus an organization with many people involved. She wanted the Red Cross in America for the next time American soldiers were involved in warfare.
Upon her return to the United States, Clara Barton lobbied for the establishment of a Red Cross in America.
That requires an international treaty agreement. You can't just join Red Cross without signing the Treaty of Geneva. And she finds that our nation is not interested in a European war relief organization. So she looks at this. Here's a problem. How do you solve it? Peacetime relief, floods, hurricanes, natural disasters. We had nothing in place in this country to deal with Americans who were affected by natural disasters. And that's the work she said the American Red Cross could do. Stand ready for war relief, but in between times help during times of peace. And that's the idea that gained popularity, and Miss Barton established the American Red Cross.
By this time, Clara Barton was a true celebrity, so much so that when the Glen Echo community was being planned, the developers built her a home to associate her name with the community.
So this house was built for her in 1891 by Edward and Edwin Baltsley. They are the original developers of the Glen Echo community. And the Baltsley brothers had originally established Glen Echo as a wonderful summer resort, a place for education and enrichment, a Chautauqua community. All of the Chautauqua buildings that they had built were built with lovely curved architecture, stone construction, and originally Clara Barton's home was supposed to blend with the Chautauqua. It had a massive stone face with a slightly pointed arch at the top of it.
The original probably looked like this inside. For 6 years, it was filled with American Red Cross relief supplies. Then in 1897, Clara Barton decided to make this her home.
In 1897, Clara Barton moves into the Glen Echo home. The trolleys now have reached the community, so it's much easier to get back and forth to the city of Washington. About 45 minutes, which isn't a bad commute, even by some standards today. But she moves into her Glen Echo building. It is a warehouse, and it's her responsibility to convert everything that is inside this building into usable space. And she also found the stone front a little unhandsome, is how she described it. So she's in the house less than 2 weeks. They're tearing the stones off the front of the building, and they're building the interior.
Today, the home is restored to illustrate her life and how she lived here, with many of her original furnishings. The building has a unique design with a long entrance hallway lined with hidden storage cupboards. The piano, she listened but never played, graces the front parlor. Her family's blue willow china is set on the table, and a painting of her beloved cat Tommy hangs nearby. On the upper 2 stories are several furnished guest rooms in which she housed her staff, along with her own bedroom. But the heart and soul of this building was behind these doors, the first headquarters of the American Red Cross.
She furnishes these rooms as working areas, and she positioned herself in the center room as president of the American Red Cross, and her staff were usually in the office that adjoined her. This was an administrative center. This is where they wrote reports. This is where they compiled information from relief efforts. They were fairly modern for their time. She did have telephone service in the house. She did have the typewriters, which were kept up in good working condition, oiled and cleaned regularly. She herself learned how to type. She had the graphophone, which could be used as a dictation machine, but it also is adjoining the dining room. And people very often will look at the dining room and think, well, why was the family dining room here in the office areas? Her Red Cross staff are like her family. Miss Barton had not married, had no children of her own. When she's here working with the Red Cross people, it's as if the extended family are with her.
Clara Barton died in 1912 at the age of 90. In her bed here at her home. 63 years passed before this house became the Clara Barton National Historic Site. Throughout that time, dedicated colleagues and friends cared for it and its furnishings as a testimony to the angel of the battlefield. Tours of Clara Barton's home are available daily on the hour between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. For more information, call the number on the screen. Okay, it's time to unveil the answer to our history quiz. We asked the question, what is this elongated iron object with 2 points on either side and a hole at the tip? Give up? In the mid-1900s, it was used for making teaspoons. Melted silver was poured into the hole. Once it cooled, the mold could be separated, revealing a brand new silver spoon. Well, that's all the time we have for this show. If you have comments for us or ideas for future shows, send an email to paths.present@verizon.net. Be sure to tune in again next time as Paths to the Present travels to the town of Brookville. See you then.